Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. Sarah was born and spent her childhood in a quiet rural area. She was a late, long-awaited child, so in her early years, she was literally bathed in parental love and boundless acceptance. She was cared for, given smiles and hugs. Almost all the neighbors paid attention to her, too. That was just the custom. Only those who found wealth left the village, heading for the city. Sarah's school years were spent in a small village school. In her class, besides herself, there were only 4 other children. The girl knew that in city schools, classes could number 30 or even more students, but it was hard for her to imagine such a large number. Time passed. Sarah grew quickly and matured. In her teenage years, she realized she wanted something more. Her parents were wonderful, honest people, but without special ambitions or aspirations. They were content with what they had, preferring peace and quiet, enough for food and clothes, and that was fine. One day, this lack of demandingness turned into a real tragedy that forever changed Sarah's worldview. Her father fell seriously ill. He was taken to the city for examination and admitted to a clinic. An expensive operation was required. Of course, the family didn't have that kind of money. Even selling their old house wouldn't have raised the necessary sum. Yes, the elderly man was treated, but the free therapy didn't have the desired effect. In the end, the illness took its toll. Sarah and her mother were left alone in the world. It was then that the realization came. No matter what, she had to achieve financial stability. Money wasn't just paper. It was a shield and a sword in this world, a means to solve many problems, freedom and security. Sarah decided to start with a quality education. Before, she had thought of enrolling in a technical college in the nearest small town. Now her goal was the capital. It was far, difficult, sometimes frightening, but that's where the best opportunities for growth were concentrated. Her mother, though worried about her daughter, warmly supported her aspiration and even hired tutors, despite the meager family budget. Sarah studied with passion, gnawing at the granite of science, forgetting about friends, entertainment, and rest altogether. She understood. She needed to fill huge gaps in her knowledge. The girl studied on her own and with teachers. All these efforts bore fruit. Soon, Sarah managed to get into the state-funded department of the economics faculty at a capital university. Seeing her name on the list of admitted students, the happy graduate jumped for joy. It hadn't been in vain. She had done it. The university wasn't the most prestigious, of course, but it readily provided dormitory accommodation for out-of-town students, which was vital for Sarah. She simply couldn't afford to rent an apartment in Moscow. And here was such support. So the girl left her native Alexandrovka. She promised her mother she would definitely graduate from university, find a good job, settle in Moscow, and then bring her there. The medicine is better there. Life is more interesting, she convinced the elderly woman. You'll see. It will be good there. Her mother smiled, nodded, but her eyes were filled with anxiety. It was scary to let such a young girl go alone into a huge metropolis. There were so many dangers there for an inexperienced provincial. But her mother worried about Sarah in vain. The girl had a clear goal, and she moved towards it with confidence. Student parties, clubs, hangouts in bars, all this passed her by. Sometimes Sarah, of course, went out with classmates to relax, but very rarely, because she was completely focused on her studies. She saw how easy it was to drop out of university, relax a little, fail an exam session, and that was it. Sarah couldn't allow herself that. She hadn't worked so hard to get into a capital university for that. Children from wealthy families, of course, could afford to relax. Their knowledge, it seemed, was paid for with crisp banknotes. Sarah didn't have that opportunity. Besides, she was genuinely interested in studying. She became smarter, more self-confident. Real prospects emerged. And then another misfortune came. Her mother died. The elderly woman had been unwell for a long time, but she tried not to worry her daughter, understanding. It was already hard for her in the big city. She didn't need to worry about her mother, too. Sarah couldn't believe for a long time that she was completely alone. Besides her parents, she had no close relatives. The girl grieved, cried, reevaluated her life. She didn't fail the exam session. Fortunately, by that time she already had a good reputation at the university, so she was given a second chance and help to catch up. Gradually, Sarah recovered and continued her path towards her goal: financial independence. Now that she was alone, this became the most important thing. She wanted to feel free, protected. The girls in her circle, of course, also dreamed of opportunities, but they came from well-off families. Maybe not super rich, but still. Beautiful clothes, fashionable gadgets, entertainment, travel. All this was part of their lives. For Sarah, money symbolized strength and security. Moreover, she understood that there was no one to help her in this life. She would have to rely only on herself. Therefore, nothing could divert her from her chosen path. But there's another way to live beautifully. Chloe, a classmate with whom she had a friendly relationship, tried to convince Sarah. Chloe constantly urged Sarah to go to a club or bar, using arguments she considered weighty. You don't have to be a blue stocking and break your teeth on the granite of science. You're young and beautiful, and there are plenty of wealthy guys around. Let's go, meet someone. You'll see. It's much more fun than sitting over textbooks. Sarah just shook her head. No, that option didn't suit her. Dependence on someone. That wasn't what she dreamed of. Dependence. Sarah sighed. She always felt a little uncomfortable when she remembered her former self, young, full of ambitious plans and hopes. Now the woman herself didn't understand how she could have ended up in such a situation. After all, her mindset was absolutely right. She was pushing straight towards her goal, not getting distracted by anything, and everything was working out for her. How did she end up in such a vulnerable position in the end? Sarah shook her head and put away the photo album. These were pictures from her student years. Looking at her past self, she plunged into memories. And sometimes she fantasized about how her life would have turned out if it hadn't been for that chance encounter with David, which turned everything upside down. At that time, Sarah had already graduated from university. Immediately after graduation, she was invited to work for a large oil company. She was one of the best students, so her candidacy was recommended to the employer. She had to learn a lot from scratch. What was written in textbooks didn't always work in practice, and Sarah quickly became convinced of this. The girl sometimes stayed in the office until midnight, delving in, learning, gaining experience from senior colleagues. It was difficult, but the salary and prospects were encouraging. Her superiors constantly rewarded her with bonuses. She steadily climbed the career ladder. Soon, Sarah managed to save up for her own home. The girl became the owner of a one-room apartment, small, in a not-so-prestigious area. But it was her own living space, earned through her own labor. True, she had to sell the village house, her native village. In short, everything was unfolding exactly as Sarah had planned. She had a good job, her own apartment. Yes, she had to work hard for this. But is it ever otherwise? Only in fairy tales and melodramas does wealth fall from the sky. In life, you have to achieve everything through hard work. The girl had learned this truth perfectly. It was difficult sometimes, of course. Sarah occasionally wanted to live like her peers. Go out, travel, meet guys, have fun with friends. But she herself led a completely different life. Work, everyday problems. After all, she had to rely only on herself, do everything herself. And so, one day, Sarah finally decided to take a vacation. She was given 2 weeks off work. She had money for a holiday. Everyone around her was constantly flying and traveling somewhere. So, why not? Sarah chose a resort recommended by a colleague. She bought bright summer clothes, packed her suitcase, and she flew from the cold Moscow early spring straight into a hot tropical summer. Alone. None of her friends could get away from the city at that time. Sarah saw the sea for the first time in her life. It was beautiful. Lying on the sand, exposing her body to the gentle sun, listening to the rustle of the waves. Finally, the girl could truly relax and rest. It turned out that a change of scenery works wonders. Sarah didn't even take excursions. She just relaxed on the shore, next to the sea, stunning in its power, and felt happy and peaceful. At the resort at that time, mostly older people were vacationing. Couples, singles, some with grandchildren. Sarah was quite satisfied with this crowd. She wasn't in the mood for adventures. She just wanted peace. But one day, as she was about to leave the beach to have dinner at the hotel, he approached her. David. A young man in shorts and a white t-shirt that clung to his muscular torso, highlighting his bronze tan. Laughing turquoise eyes, a charming white-toothed smile, slightly tousled, sun-bleached hair the color of ripe wheat. "Hi," he greeted Sarah, as if they had known each other for 100 years. "I've been watching you for a long time. You're so beautiful and always alone." "Hi," Sarah smiled. She couldn't take her eyes off his mesmerizing eyes. The guy was truly handsome. They started talking, got acquainted. The young man introduced himself as David, said he was vacationing there with his family. They had rented a bungalow near the hotel, and that he had been watching her from afar every evening because he liked her very much. "You're incredibly beautiful," David said, looking Sarah directly in the eyes. "People probably tell you that often?" The girl shook her head. She had almost no experience interacting with young men. She was always too busy, studying, working, no time for dates and romances. So now, the young man's compliments made her head spin. Yes, guys had tried to approach her before, but Sarah, she was as if wearing armor. In the city, she remembered her goal, knew she couldn't spread herself thin. But here, she suddenly really wanted to be near David. He was so handsome, gallant, pleasant to talk to. Perhaps it was the fact that Sarah was at the sea for the first time, and alone at that. Her mood and outlook on life at that moment were completely different. In short, a romance began between the young people. Beautiful, bright, passionate. Sarah finally allowed herself to relax. David showed her completely different corners of the resort, not the ones where most tourists vacationed. They watched the sunset in the mountains, kissed in blooming groves, whose existence Sarah hadn't suspected, scuba dived on deserted beaches, something Sarah thought she would never dare to do. But David persuaded her, she agreed, and didn't regret it. She had never seen such beauty with her own eyes, a coral reef and marine life in their natural habitat. It was a completely different world. There were also clubs, discos, and delicious, instantly intoxicating cocktails. David seemed genuinely in love with Sarah. He held her tenderly, looked at her with admiration, showered her with compliments, gave her gifts. The girl understood that this was most likely a resort romance, and such relationships, as is known, rarely have a continuation. But she tried not to think about it, and for the first time in her life, simply enjoyed the moment, getting pleasure without unnecessary thoughts. But unexpectedly, the resort romance continued. Sarah flew back to Moscow earlier. Her vacation was coming to an end. She needed to return to work, to her usual life. The day before, David held her in his arms for a long time, confessing his love. "I don't want to let you go. I'd spend my whole life with you here, in this paradise." Sarah just smiled sadly. She was also sad that this fairy tale was ending, but she was used to thinking soberly and understood. David would quickly forget her, most likely find someone else before the end of his vacation, and say the same passionate words to another girl. And he wouldn't be lying. He wasn't lying now either. He surely felt that way. But theirs was a typical resort romance. There was nothing to count on. Although, of course, she also didn't want to part with David. Witty, kind, generous. It was so nice to feel again that someone cared about you, that you weren't alone. Sarah didn't expect it, but David continued to communicate with her. He called, sent photos from the sea, wrote long messages. The resort romance didn't stay at the resort. And then David returned home. He also lived in Moscow, and he invited Sarah on another date. The girl's heart pounded wildly that evening. Could it be? Could it really be true? David hadn't forgotten her and wanted to continue. She wondered how everything would be here, in the big city, not on the seaside. What if David was disappointed? The girl worried in vain. As soon as he saw Sarah, David rushed to her, hugged her, held her close, and all doubts immediately vanished. "Can you imagine how much I missed you? I dreamed about you." The chance meeting at the resort grew into something more. The young people became very close. Sarah knew that David was still living with his parents. He had graduated from the economics faculty, worked at his uncle's firm, but dreamed of his own business. He already had a plan, just lacked the money to start. But David was actively working on it, saving, investing. In short, trying to start something of his own. They talked a lot about this future business. Sarah found the idea quite promising. She had enough knowledge and experience to discuss this topic with David. Her husband amazed her with his intelligence and creativity. "I'm not afraid of anything at all," the guy sometimes said. "Together, we'll move mountains, build an entire empire, become rich and independent. And we'll be able to travel freely, without thinking about anything, and relax. Hired workers will do everything for us." Sarah immediately picked up. "True, we won't achieve this quickly." "It's okay. We can do everything together. We'll overcome everything." Soon David and Sarah started living together. They decided to settle in Sarah's apartment. David had his own separate living space. His parents had bought him an apartment in a prestigious area, but they set a condition. Their son would only move there after getting married. It was a family nest, not a bachelor pad. Gradually, the young people began to build their own business. Things went slowly. Sarah and David continued to work at their jobs, but every spare penny was now invested in the business. They had to save on some things, cut back. But both understood what it was all for. It soon became clear that significant investments were needed for further development. "Where can we get the money?" David asked one day. "What if you sell your apartment? This one-room place. We won't be living here anyway. We need something bigger, more decent. But the money will be just enough to get our company off the ground." Sarah shook her head. How could she sell her one-room apartment? Yes, the apartment was small, but it was her own living space, earned through hard work, especially since their business was still shaky, and it was unclear if anything serious would come of it. "But where will we live?" Sarah asked. She simply didn't know what to say to her beloved. "I've thought it all through. We'll get married. I've wanted to propose to you for a long time. We'll get married and move into my apartment. You know, my parents set a condition. Only with a wife in the new apartment. The apartment is big, beautiful, In a good area. We'll be better off there. And we'll sell your one-room place and put the money into the business. Everything will work out for us. You'll see? We'll be rich. Just like we dreamed. And we'll achieve everything ourselves. Understand? Sarah's vision blurred. So much had fallen on her. The proposal to sell the apartment and the talk of marriage. She needed to think about it. But David was so convincing and enthusiastic. Indeed, why doubt? David had proven the sincerity of his feelings more than once. They were together. Neither had anyone closer. A happy family life and a joint business lay ahead. David was as reliable as a rock. He loved her. So what was there to think about? David and Sarah got married a month later. They didn't have a lavish wedding, although the groom's parents insisted on a grand celebration. Of course, their only son was getting married. But Sarah? Who would she invite? She had no relatives, not many friends. And the money. The money that would have to be spent on the celebration was better saved for business development. Both were enthusiastic about this idea. The business was their common brainchild and dream. So David and Sarah, after registering their marriage, simply sat down with the groom's parents in a restaurant, celebrated the event, talked, and got acquainted. David's father quickly excused himself. He was a busy man, constantly on calls, dealing with work processes. But David's mother, Eleanor, was already retired. She used to work with her husband, but had now stepped away from affairs. And she was in no hurry. Sarah never understood whether Eleanor liked her or not. She behaved like a snow queen, unemotional, a little prim, impeccably polite. It was impossible to guess her feelings from her face. Sarah immediately understood. Their relationship wouldn't be close. That wasn't the kind of person she was. And it was a pity. She wanted so much to feel warmth and acceptance. "Mom, she's just like that," David explained later. "But she's good, really. Don't worry. Mom won't interfere with us." "I thought she wanted a different wife for you, from a wealthier family." "No," David smiled. "You just don't know her. She doesn't judge like that. The main thing for her is the person themselves. And you are wonderful, and Mom definitely understood that. She's good at reading people." They saw each other sometimes at family holidays, or just casually, sometimes had lunch together. Eleanor made no attempts to get closer, but also showed no hostility. She never tried to needle or insult the rootless one. Sarah sold her apartment. The money was invested in the business, and the business began to grow and prosper. Sales increased, new clients appeared. The small company turned into a powerful market player. The business required a lot of time and effort, so first Sarah quit her job, and then David left his uncle's firm. The couple fully focused on their own business. Both worked from dawn till dusk, standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, like two devoted warriors. They weren't afraid of work or difficulties. All this bore fruit. There was almost no time for rest. Sarah spent days on end at the office. David traveled around the country looking for major clients and the best suppliers. Each had their role, and each understood. Only together were they strong. The couple had many plans and ideas. Their common business brought them closer, made them a single entity. Sarah was amazed by her husband's work ethic and enthusiasm, and he never tired of praising her. Sarah was excellent with financial reports, planning, and successful ideas were most often born in her head. The couple understood. They were very close to their dream. Soon the business would be able to work almost independently, and they would gain freedom, money, the ability to travel and relax. They even enjoyed working, achieving success, winning, overcoming difficulties. But they still wanted a more flexible schedule. Both felt it was possible. They just needed to work a little more. And then, an unexpected pregnancy, like a bolt from the blue. The couple hadn't thought about children yet. It wasn't the time. What child with such a workload? Heirs were planned, but in the distant future. The birth of children was postponed until those happy times when David and Sarah's company could operate without their constant supervision. Sarah initially decided that the dizziness, nausea, and pain were from overwork, or her stomach was acting up. They often ate on the go, dry food, or even forgot to eat altogether. But the unpleasant condition didn't go away. Sarah had to see a doctor. At the hospital, she was stunned by the news of her pregnancy, advised to register, and prescribed vitamins. Sarah returned home in tears. David was working remotely that day. Seeing his upset wife, he turned pale. He knew she had gone to the hospital and thought they had found serious health problems. "I'm expecting a baby," Sarah almost whispered. "How could this happen? We took all precautions." "A baby!" David's face lit up. Sarah saw. Her husband wasn't experiencing doubt or torment. He was simply genuinely happy. "Really? That's wonderful. Wonderful." Wonderful. Sarah was surprised. She had expected a different reaction. She thought he would be flustered, would scold her. But this sincere joy, this radiant smile, David's reaction, it greatly influenced Sarah's feelings. The woman suddenly felt joy, too. She had a baby under her heart, her and David's little one. This was wonderful, and no circumstances could hinder her joy. The couple hugged and immediately began making plans. That's how business-minded and practical they were. "It's okay. Our business is at such a level now that I can handle it alone." David stroked Sarah's hair. "The main thing is, we'll have a baby. I've dreamed of this for a long time. I just didn't tell you. I saw you weren't ready yet." "Pregnancy isn't a disease," Sarah replied. "I can work while pregnant, and later, when the baby is born. Not like now, of course, but still." "We'll manage completely. Don't even worry," David assured her. "We're together after all." But Sarah was mistaken. The pregnancy turned out to be difficult. The expectant mother felt unwell and had to be hospitalized for preservation repeatedly. David assured her that her main job now was to protect the baby. But Sarah felt inadequate because she couldn't work, couldn't devote time to the family business. And her husband had to spend days on end at the office alone. After all, now he was left alone with all the problems. This upset Sarah. The woman hoped that when the child was born, it would get easier. Not immediately, of course, a little later, but children grow so fast. Lily was born significantly prematurely. Due to being premature, the baby had health problems. Sarah completely devoted herself to treatment and withdrew from business affairs. Although, no, not completely. David still needed help with reports, and Sarah, after a difficult day with her daughter, would sit at the kitchen table at night and delve into financial indicators, summarize results, and draw conclusions. David trusted her with this, and Sarah appreciated it. Although it was hard, her eyes were heavy with sleep, her head was pounding, Sarah didn't complain. She even liked the feeling. Sitting on maternity leave, she hadn't lost her touch. She was still good. Lily gradually grew stronger. The diagnoses the doctors had warned about gradually disappeared. But the girl was still capricious and sickly, requiring a lot of attention. Sarah was very tired. It was good that Eleanor took on some of the care. The mother-in-law simply adored her granddaughter, smiled with her, spoke gentle words. And Sarah, and even David, were surprised by this. "Mom just transforms when she's with Lily," the young father shook his head. "I've never seen her like this, not even when I was little." Lily had performed a real miracle. She had melted the Snow Queen's heart. However, this had little impact on Eleanor and Sarah's relationship. The mother-in-law still kept her distance. But they saw each other more often now, of course. Eleanor often came to take her granddaughter for a walk. For the young mother, this was a time of rest and peace, which she needed like air. 5 years passed. Sarah never managed to return to work. She had to take care of Lily. The girl still required rehabilitation and constant therapy. She often caught colds. The prematurity took its toll. She couldn't attend kindergarten. Sarah still helped her husband with reports at night. It was a significant amount of work, but not a full-time job. Before they were equals. Now David carried the family business on his shoulders. Sarah only helped. There was no shortage of money. The business brought in a stable income. But the dream of the business running almost independently was still far off. So David spent all his time at work, and Sarah, she stayed at home, took care of the child and the household. Mostly Lily. This was a separate victory for Sarah. Doctors had predicted the girl would be almost a vegetable, frightening them with serious developmental delays. But constant therapy and rehabilitation worked wonders. Lily was now not particularly different from her peers. Well, she was thin, of course, and often sick. But otherwise, she was a perfectly normal child. And only Sarah knew how much work had gone into all of this. And she understood. There was still a lot of work ahead, but Lily's prospects were excellent, which meant she had to roll up her sleeves and work. Sarah was used to it. The woman had absolutely no time for herself. The child, the reports, the household chores, all this drained her strength. Sarah hadn't liked looking at herself in the mirror lately. She had gained weight. Not completely fat, but not the graceful gazelle she had been 5 years ago. Her skin was gray from lack of sleep. She had bags under her eyes, and her hair was always pulled back in a messy bun. Sarah now chose a sporty style of clothing. Her old narrow skirts and stylish blouses hung in the back of the closet. Heels gathered dust there too. Jeans, loose t-shirts, sneakers. That was her everyday wardrobe. It was comfortable, and the extra pounds weren't as noticeable. And you couldn't chase a lively child around playgrounds in heels. Her friend Chloe, from university days, scolded Sarah. "You're giving your whole self to the family. Do you think anyone appreciates it? Hardly. You can't do that. You need to think about yourself too." "Of course I need to," Sarah agreed. "But how? Who will take care of Lily, the house, the financial reports?" Sarah preferred to think that this situation was temporary. When her daughter grew up, she would take care of herself and return to full-time work. She just needed to be patient. It was just a phase. Only this phase never seemed to end. David had somehow distanced himself. Understandable. Work. Many worries. But still. The man came home late, or even spent the night at the office. He listened to his wife with half an ear. Lily's affairs hardly interested him. And yet, it was he who had once persuaded Sarah to keep the child. The only thing they talked about was the financial reports that Sarah checked and compiled. Colleagues, his boss, his subordinates, that was his circle now. They no longer went out together, didn't go anywhere, not even to corporate events. David preferred to go alone. Well, there's no one to leave Lily with. And anyway, you wouldn't find it interesting there. The people have changed. I wouldn't go myself, but my position requires it. Sarah understood perfectly why David avoided going out together. She was never stupid. Of course, her husband was embarrassed by his wife, by the way she had become. Overweight, tired. He himself had been like that a few years ago, but their family life, a complex, sickly child, had played their part. It was painful to realize this. But what could she do? Sarah blamed herself for not keeping up with everything and perhaps organizing her time and priorities incorrectly. David started avoiding touch. Sarah tried to hug him, to press herself against him. The man invariably pulled away. It was as if an invisible wall had grown between them. Sarah hoped to regain their former relationship. She read articles by psychologists, searched for information. She started doing abs exercises at home. There was no time for the gym. And she exercised with Lily in front of the TV. Both even started to enjoy it. Sarah understood. Her marriage was under threat, and she, as the woman, bore a great responsibility. Sarah was determined to fight for her family's happiness. At that time, she didn't understand, didn't know, that it wasn't about her at all. The epiphany came late in the evening. David, as usual, returned late. Lily was already asleep. Sarah was reading in bed. David looked sullen, thoughtful. He immediately went to the bathroom, leaving his phone, which he usually never let out of his hand, on the nightstand. And then, when he was in the shower, the phone vibrated. Sarah knew. Her husband could be called about work at any moment. Partners lived and worked in different time zones. Late calls were not uncommon. Sarah decided to answer the call, in case it was urgent. "Hello, Mr. David Petrovich," a polite male voice said on the line. "This is the Rose of the Winds restaurant calling. Your lovely companion left her handbag on the table. I assure you, it's perfectly safe. A courier will deliver it to any address you provide. We take care of our regular customers." Sarah carefully pressed the disconnect button. Almost immediately, the phone vibrated again. Perhaps the person from the restaurant wanted the address. Sarah ignored the call. She pulled the blanket up, curled into a ball, pulling her knees to her chin, and thought. The water was running in the bathroom. Her husband, David, was in the shower there. The man Sarah had trusted implicitly, apparently, in vain. She had thought the difficulties were temporary, that everything would work out if she just put in the effort, and their relationship would regain its vibrancy. And now it turned out that her beloved husband was a regular customer of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. And he was there with a lovely companion, as the employee from the Rose of the Winds had called her. The most hurtful part, there could be no mistake, because David had been addressed by his full name and patronymic, so there was no point in hoping that someone had dialed the wrong number. David Petrovich and his lovely companion. So, David had a mistress. Well, a wealthy man could certainly afford that. That meant work wasn't the reason for his constant absence. Frequent business trips. Perhaps they were just holidays with his mistress. And Sarah, she had even felt sorry for her husband, thinking he worked so hard, never saw the light of day. So, while she was battling Lily's problems alone, helping the child get back on her feet, creating comfort, poring over reports at night, David was having fun. He had stopped paying attention to his wife and daughter, and Sarah had even blamed herself for it. How foolish she had been not to notice. At that moment, David came out of the bathroom. Sarah looked at her husband with completely different eyes. She noticed his athletic, toned body. Of course, he had set up a mini gym for himself in the office. Tanned, handsome, self-confident, and wealthy too. Naturally, such a man was a magnet for women. Sarah suddenly felt sorry for herself. David had lived exactly as he wanted all these years. He loved himself and put himself first. And Sarah, for her, the family's interests came first. And here was the result. She didn't even recognize herself in the mirror. "Your lovely companion forgot her bag," Sarah said in a flat voice, sitting up in bed. "What?" David was taken aback. "So you took my phone?" "I answered a call. I thought it was for work, but it was about something else entirely. A lovely companion." David quickly composed himself. He went to the closet, took out his pajamas, and started changing, as if nothing had happened. There wasn't a trace of guilt or confusion, as if this was perfectly normal. "So you don't want to tell me anything?" Sarah felt herself boiling. Unlike her husband, she found it hard to stay calm. Well, it seems you found out everything yourself. David took a blanket and pillow from the bed. It was clear. He was going to sleep in the living room, on the sofa. And rightly so, after such a revelation. And yet... All right. David looked at his wife with a calm, confident gaze. And this infuriated her even more. All right. Yes, I have another woman. Young, beautiful, interesting. I find her interesting and fun, you understand? I feel like I get energy from her, and she loves me. But I love you too. The words escaped Sarah's lips before she could think. She absolutely didn't want to confess her feelings to her cheating husband in this situation. But it was the truth. Sarah truly loved David. He was still the closest and dearest person to her. You love me? David scoffed. It doesn't seem like it. All I hear from you is, Lily, Lily, as if there are no other topics. And anyway, look at yourself, what you've become. At first, I didn't understand what was wrong. My feelings for you seemed to be cooling. And you're not just standing still, you're degrading. Her husband's words deeply wounded Sarah. It was hurtful and unfair. You were smart and beautiful once. I've already understood that I need to accept it. We've just grown up, everyday life, a child. Maybe strong feelings, bright emotions only happen in youth. And then I met her. Jessica. She's like she breathed life into me. Everything around me became bright and interesting again. I was living, truly living. But at home, here, with you, this kind of melancholy, this feeling of hopelessness, always creeps back over me. Jessica, on the other hand, gives me strength and energy, inspires me. Jessica, Sarah repeated. So that was the name of the lovely companion. She was surely a real beauty with a model appearance. David would hardly have paid attention to anyone else. We are both to blame for this, the man said. Now there was a note in his voice, but Sarah couldn't tell if it was sincere or feigned, appropriate for the moment. Well, since it happened that you know everything now, it's time to talk about divorce. Jessica. She's tired of being my mistress, tired of hiding. I was going to tell you everything myself. It was hard to decide. And then this happened. It's even good that it happened this way. Not now, Sarah shook her head. I need to think about everything. Of course. David nodded and left the bedroom with the blanket and pillow. Of course, Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She cried, quietly burying her face in the pillow. Tears brought temporary relief, and then the emotional torment began again. The woman blamed herself, then David, then Jessica. What kind of creature must you be to have an affair with a married man? Sarah also thought about the future. How would they live separately now? They would have to divide the property, a difficult and lengthy process. Lily? Of course, she wasn't very attached to her father, but she would still ask questions. What should she tell her? How to explain it to a 5-year-old child? Towards morning, Sarah fell into a heavy sleep. Lily woke her up. David was already gone. He had left for work. Or maybe not for work. Who knew? 3 days passed. During this time, David was living somewhere outside the house, probably with his mistress. Perhaps he was renting an apartment for her, or had bought her an apartment. Sarah gradually got used to the idea of divorce, accepted it. It was difficult, of course, but she wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Anything happens. The woman began planning her future without her husband, thinking about how to live on. She was hardly worried about the financial side. Sarah had been compiling reports for so many years. She understood perfectly well that their business brought in good income. It was a profitable business. Selling it would yield a good amount of money. That would be enough for a comfortable life. Besides, There was jointly acquired property. The apartment, cars. They certainly wouldn't starve. She didn't even need to file for alimony. But then an unpleasant surprise awaited Sarah. They met with David in a cafe to discuss the divorce details. For some reason, Sarah dressed up as if for a date. For the first time in a long time, she put on makeup and wore a dress. "Sit down," David gestured towards the table. "You look good. Well done." He was probably trying to be polite. Betrayal. Yes, betrayal. That's exactly what it was called. They talked a little about Lily. Then David asked, "Have you decided where you'll live?" "What?" Sarah was taken aback. "Are you planning to sell the apartment? I thought you'd leave it to us for now. This isn't the time to deal with selling. Lily has rehabilitation again. Let's sell it later." "Sell it? No. Jessica and I plan to live there. She likes the area, she likes the apartment, she has tons of ideas for renovations. So..." "And what if I don't agree?" Sarah felt rage. David had changed so much. He was ready to kick his daughter and ex-wife out of the apartment for the sake of a new woman. Outrageous. Sarah, on principle, wouldn't let the traitor carry out his plan. "And your consent isn't required," David said. "How so?" "The apartment was acquired during the marriage. It's jointly acquired property, which means everything is registered in my mother's name. The business, the apartment, the cars, even the bank account. As I said, you've become distracted. You don't even pay attention to these details." "You only mentioned one of the cars." Sarah shook her head bitterly. Yes, David had registered a new car in Eleanor's name. He had explained it with tax benefits for pensioners. Apparently for the same reason, he had re-registered the joint business in his mother's name. He hadn't even consulted her. "You did this behind my back. My God, you're a real monster." "Don't exaggerate," David calmly retorted. "Behind what back? I brought you documents to sign at home. As always, you were only thinking about the child and getting to bed earlier. And I didn't hide anything. You just didn't pay attention." Sarah remembered that period. Lily's life and health hung in the balance. Doctors gave frightening diagnoses, and treatment required Sarah's full involvement. She was burned out and had indeed lost her edge. She had no strength left for anything but her daughter. Perhaps David had been dealing with the re-registration at that moment. "Everything is registered in my mother's name. So you and I have practically nothing. There's nothing to divide." "That's unfair. How can you do this to me? To us? What about Lily?" "I'll pay alimony for Lily. A decent amount. Enough for renting a place, for living, and for treatment. But we created this company together from scratch. I sold my only home for our business, invested everything, because I was sure we were together, we would support each other. And now you're doing this to me." "To be honest, I was mainly in charge of the company. You stayed at home. You weren't even particularly interested in the firm's affairs." "What about the reports? You dumped a huge amount of work on me. It was hard for me. I didn't sleep at night balancing the reports, and in the morning, it was back to hospitals with my daughter. Do you have any idea what that cost me?" "Why are you acting like a child? That's a trifle. It's not even worth mentioning. Thank you for your help. I won't leave you without means either. I'll help." "Thank you very much," Sarah blurted out bitterly. "Mind you, I won't give up what's mine so easily. I'll fight. I'll hire lawyers." "That's your right. But you'll just waste time and money. The documents are clean. The business is in my mother's name, the apartment and cars too. The lawyers will tell you the same thing." He left, and Sarah sat in the cafe for a long time, processing the information. Just as she was recovering from the shock of David's betrayal, now this. Sarah hired lawyers. This dragged out the process. The woman had to attend court often. Eleanor took care of her daughter during this time. Yes, the very mother-in-law in whose name, it turned out, all the property was registered. Sarah simply had no one else to turn to. She understood, of course, that Eleanor would support her son, and besides, there had never been a warm relationship between them. Eleanor kept her distance. Lately, she had even stopped visiting her granddaughter. But when her daughter-in-law called and asked for help, she didn't refuse. Sarah didn't even try to discuss the affairs with her mother-in-law, understanding she would obey her son in everything, but she was a great help to her almost ex-daughter-in-law with her granddaughter. Sarah couldn't even hire a nanny. She had absolutely nothing now, and she wasn't living on money from the joint business, as she had thought, but on handouts from her successful husband. It was humiliating and hurtful. Sarah now knew what Jessica looked like. She sometimes appeared at court with David. Tall, dark-skinned, long-legged, and very slender. Long dark hair flowed beautifully over her elegant shoulders. David's hand was almost always on Jessica's waist, and she looked at him so devotedly that Sarah began to understand her husband. It must be hard to resist the gaze of such a beauty. David. It turned out Sarah had never known him. Or perhaps he had changed drastically, transformed into a different person. The bond that had been between them was slowly and painfully breaking. That was also difficult. Sarah turned off the light and lay down in what was still her bedroom, cozy and familiar. Soon she and Lily would have to leave. Although hope, however faint, still remained. Tomorrow was the decisive hearing that would clarify everything. However, Sarah's lawyers couldn't do anything. At the final hearing, the judge delivered the verdict. All documents were correctly executed. The spouses had no jointly acquired property. Lily was awarded alimony, a pittance, because David, of course, had assigned himself a minimal official salary. Sarah walked out of the courthouse on shaky legs. She was left with nothing. Sarah saw David gallantly open the door of a new SUV for Jessica. She gracefully slid into the passenger seat, and they sped away. And what was she to do? How would she raise Lily? She couldn't even send her to kindergarten to go back to work. Her daughter was still too weak and sickly. Sarah called a taxi. She needed to go to her mother-in-law's. But this woman, she was also involved in David's treacherous scheme. His mother couldn't have been unaware of her son's plans. With a heavy heart, Sarah rang her mother-in-law's doorbell. She lived in a new house in the center, in a luxurious 2-story apartment. Eleanor opened the door and smiled at Sarah. Yes, she smiled. It was unusual. As she spoke, she held Lily in her arms. Lily was also smiling broadly. "Mommy's here!" the little girl exclaimed, reaching out her hands to Sarah. "Come in. We'll have coffee and cake now. We need to talk about a lot of things." All of this was strange. Sarah sat modestly on the edge of a chair. "With milk?" Eleanor asked in a casual tone. Sarah nodded. "Well, don't worry." Eleanor sat down opposite her. "I know what happened in court today. David has already reported it. You're left with nothing." "Why did he do this to me?" Sarah stammered. She hadn't intended to discuss this with her mother-in-law, but she couldn't help herself. Eleanor had started it herself. "Why did he do this to me? It's not about you at all." The elderly woman shook her head. "Don't even think you did something wrong. You tried very hard. It's in his nature, his genes. I don't know. Maybe I missed something in his upbringing." Sarah stared wide-eyed at her mother-in-law. These were not the words she had expected at all. Eleanor seemed to be on her daughter-in-law's side, instead of supporting her son. "My current husband is not David's father, not his real father. His father, Peter, raised him as his own. But my son's biological father ran off as soon as he learned about the pregnancy. A prettier, brighter, richer girl took him away. And I was left alone. Peter had loved me for a long time. He supported me, accepted my son as his own. But David, it seems, took more from his biological father than I would have liked. He did the same thing to his wife as his biological parents did. Even worse. I didn't know that. Well, now you do. David is quite the manipulator. Do you know what he told me about you to get my approval, to get me on his side during the divorce? He said you were promiscuous and the child wasn't his. Lily. He only told me this recently, when he was transferring the property to me. He said that if anything happened, if there was a divorce, he didn't want to give you anything, since you came to everything ready-made. How did I come to everything ready-made? We built this business together, and I never cheated. Did he really say that about me? He did, and I believed him. You understand? I always dreamed of a daughter, but God didn't give Peter and me children together. And then there was Lily, my granddaughter, a girl, a princess, my beloved baby. I doted on her. I don't think I've ever loved anyone so much. And then David said she wasn't related to me, that you had the child out of wedlock. Oh, how angry I was with you. Maybe you noticed I stopped visiting you. I missed Lily terribly, but I thought maybe if I saw her less often I'd forget, and it wouldn't hurt so much. Nothing worked. My heart ached for the little one. Meanwhile, her son initiated the divorce process. David was happy that the property was in his mother's name, and his unfaithful wife wouldn't get anything. And Eleanor thought it was fair. Indeed, a shrewd girl came from nowhere and dumped someone else's child on her husband. However, Eleanor could still understand this. She had been in a similar situation herself. Peter had taken her in with a child. Only she had been faithful to her husband and grateful for his support. But this Sarah? She continued to cheat. At least, that's what David said. The man suffered, tormented himself, tried to reason with her, and then met a new woman and decided he couldn't go on like this. So he initiated the divorce. And his mother supported him. Who enjoys watching their child suffer? Sarah hired lawyers. She didn't want to part with the property. One of them developed a flurry of activity. And he found out that Sarah had invested in the business not only through labor, but also with money. And Eleanor began to doubt. The lawyer made her think. She hired someone who found out everything. That's when it all became clear. Yes, Sarah had sold her apartment, and the couple had started the business with that money. And then Eleanor realized that David hadn't told her the whole truth. And then hope appeared. What if the words about her granddaughter were also a lie? Eleanor kept a lock of David's hair in the family album. She had saved the first cut strand as a keepsake. Her granddaughter, purely intuitively, before the last hearing, Eleanor decided to have a DNA test done. The material was at hand. Today, the results came. Lily is David's daughter and my granddaughter. There is no doubt about it. Forgive me for doubting you, but David can be very convincing. After the divorce, David, feeling victorious, flew to the sea, with Jessica, of course, to celebrate his victory and liberation. They celebrated lavishly, chose a luxurious resort, sparing no expense. David believed that everything was now his. Jessica was also sure. She loved a glamorous life and believed she deserved it. Not everyone is blessed by God with such dazzling looks. Jessica treated her beauty as capital. This was why David had tried so hard to win everything from his ex-wife. He understood that it took money to keep such a beauty. Now he had it. He had no doubts about his mother. He had worked her over completely. His mother thought Sarah was promiscuous and hated her for giving her a granddaughter who, as it soon turned out, was not related by blood at all. She had already loved the girl with all her heart. Upon David's return, a most unpleasant surprise awaited him. It turned out that his mother had sold everything: the business, the property, absolutely everything. She could do this herself, as everything was registered in her name. Only David couldn't have imagined that his mother would do such a thing. He was 100% sure of her. Eleanor gave the money to her granddaughter and former daughter-in-law. All the money. Now Sarah was rich, and he was left with nothing. However, his ex-wife showed unprecedented generosity. When David had recovered a little from the blow, Sarah transferred half of the funds to him. She didn't even call. She wrote a letter. "We built this business together. The company is our brainchild. You betrayed me, acted terribly. But I am not like you. As it turned out, we are very different. It is fair to give you half of our money, so I will act justly. Now, nothing binds us." Starting a new business from scratch turned out to be not so profitable. Back then, Sarah was by his side. They created the company together, supported each other, fought shoulder to shoulder. But now David was alone with the problems, and he wasn't always handling them well. He lost most of the funds. He invested unsuccessfully, made mistakes. Jessica, of course, soon left David. She found a richer man. And Sarah? She moved with her daughter to another city where she decided to start over. She had money to live on. Sarah and Lily traveled a lot, exploring the world. It was fascinating. Sarah didn't maintain contact with David, and he didn't seek communication either. Perhaps he was ashamed to look his ex-wife in the eye. But Sarah became truly friends with Eleanor. They often traveled somewhere together, talked a lot, and Sarah felt happy. She knew a long, rich life and many interesting encounters lay ahead.